The moment the window latch clicked at 2:47 in the morning, Ethan Cole was already awake. He had been lying on his back, staring at the ceiling of his childhood bedroom, listening to the kind of silence that a small Nevada town produces when every living soul has given up on the day. Then the latch clicked, and the silence cracked open. He did not move. His body made that decision before his brain caught up, locking every muscle into a rigid, flat statue under the sheets. The window was on the east wall. He knew, without looking, that whoever was pushing it from outside had done it slowly, carefully, the way someone does when they do not want to be heard. That careful slowness was somehow worse than if they had just smashed the glass. His phone was on the nightstand, 12 inches away. It felt like a mile. The window slid up. Cool desert air rolled into the room, carrying the smell of dry sage and something else. Something faintly electric, like the air before a lightning strike, even when the sky was completely clear. Then he heard breathing. It was not quite right. It had a rhythm, but the rhythm was too long, too slow, and at the end of each exhale there was a faint resonance, like two sounds stacked on top of each other, as if whoever was breathing had more than one passage for air. Ethan turned his head. She was already halfway through the window. He had lived next door to Zona for 11 months. She had moved into the rental property beside his parents' house in the middle of a dust storm, arriving in a vehicle that nobody on the block could describe accurately afterward. And she had been there ever since, quiet and strange, and occasionally standing in her backyard at 3 in the morning, looking at the sky with an expression that Ethan had never been able to name from his window. She was tall, taller than anyone he knew, with long limbs that moved just slightly too smoothly, the way a plant bends toward light, all in one continuous arc rather than in the jointed, stop-start way that human motion tends to work. Her skin was a pale gray-green in certain light, which his mother had attributed to a condition, and her eyes, when she turned them on you, were an amber color so deep they looked lit from inside. She had told him her name was Zona. She had never told him anything else, and now she was climbing through his second-story bedroom window at 2:47 in the morning with the precise, unhurried confidence of someone who had a very good reason and absolutely no intention of explaining it yet. Ethan sat up. She got one long leg over the sill and then stopped, balanced half in and half out, and looked at him. In the dark, her eyes caught the faint glow of the streetlight outside and reflected it back like a cat's, except steadier, warmer. She put one finger to her lips. He did not scream. He was genuinely surprised about that. His heart was doing something complicated in his chest, a kind of hammering stutter that he felt all the way up in his jaw. But his voice stayed shut. Maybe it was the 11 months of watching her from his window. Maybe it was the way she looked at him. Not like a threat, but like a person delivering important news who needed a second to figure out how to phrase it. She came the rest of the way through the window and straightened up to her full height in the middle of his bedroom. She was wearing a plain gray shirt and dark pants, and her feet were bare. She was carrying something under one arm, wrapped in cloth, pressed close to her side. She looked at the window, then at the door, then at him. A full diagnostic sweep of the room that lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then she said very quietly, mas in the accent that had always sounded like English, learned from 3 different sources at once. I need to put this somewhere safe. Your room is the safest place I could find. Ethan stared at her. You calculated my bedroom. Yes. At 2 in the morning. The calculation does not care about the time. He looked at the wrapped object under her arm. It was roughly the size of a shoebox, but the cloth around it was moving. Not dramatically. Just a faint, slow pulsing, like something inside was breathing. Every sensible instinct he had told him to say no. To tell her to leave. To pick up his phone and call someone who handled situations like this, whatever agency that would be. His mouth said, "Okay." Zona exhaled. It was one of those double-layered exhales. And up close, in the quiet of the room, it was even stranger. Like hearing a chord instead of a note. She moved to the corner of the room near his desk and knelt down, setting the wrapped bundle on the floor with the kind of care that people use for things that are either very fragile or very important, or both. She folded back one corner of the cloth, and Ethan leaned forward without meaning to. Inside was an egg. It was roughly oval, deep blue-black, and the surface had a faint luminescence to it, a shifting, living kind of light that moved the way oil moves on water. It was warm. He could feel the warmth from 6 feet away, a gentle, radiant heat that was completely at odds with the cold air still drifting through the open window. Zona looked at him over her shoulder. "You're not running," she said. "I'm thinking about it." The corner of her mouth moved. In 11 months, he had never seen her do anything that could be called a smile. But whatever this was, it was adjacent to one. "It will hatch in 4 days," she said. "It cannot be in my house. They know where my house is." Ethan's brain snagged on that word. They. He looked at the egg. It pulsed once, gently, and the light under its surface rippled outward like a slow heartbeat. "Who," he said, "is they?" Zona stood up. She looked at the window. Somewhere outside, in the direction of the highway, a car engine that had been running in the distance cut off abruptly. The silence that replaced it was a different quality of silence than before. Thicker. Watching. Zona turned back to him, and her amber eyes were very serious. "I will explain everything," she said. "But not until we close that window." Ethan got out of bed. He crossed the room and pulled the window shut and locked the latch. Through the glass, he could see the dark street, the dry lawns, the ordinary Nevada nothing of a small town at 3 in the morning. Nothing moved. But the skin on the back of his arms was doing something that had nothing to do with the cold. He turned around. Zona was already sitting cross-legged on his floor next to the egg, her long back straight, her hands resting on her knees, watching the door like she expected it to do something interesting. "Sit down, Ethan Cole," she said. He sat down on the edge of his bed, and she began to talk. Zona did not start at the beginning. She started in the middle, which Ethan would later understand was intentional, because the beginning was the kind of thing you had to build up to, the kind of thing that needed context before it could land without destroying a person. She told him that the egg on his floor was not the first one. It was the third. The first 2 had not survived, not because they were fragile, but because something had found them before they could hatch. Something that was very good at finding things and very thorough about what it did when it found them. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed and listened. And the whole time he was listening, he kept glancing at the egg, because it kept doing something. It was not dramatic. It was not glowing or spinning or making sounds. It was just breathing. That slow, rhythmic pulse under the surface. And something about that breathing made it impossible to look away for long. "What is inside it?" he asked when she paused. "My daughter," she said. The room went very quiet. Zona looked at him with those amber eyes that caught light from nowhere, and she said it the way someone says a fact, a settled, certain thing, not a plea, not an apology. Just the word. placed down in front of him with both hands. Ethan was 23 years old. He had grown up in this town, gone to the state university 4 hours away, come back when his father got sick, and planned to leave again as soon as things stabilized. He had not planned for any part of this. And yet, here he was, sitting in his childhood bedroom in the dark, while his alien neighbor told him that she had hidden her unborn child in his room because it was the safest place she could calculate. "They killed the other two," he said. "Yes." "Who are they?" She was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone who didn't know the answer. The quiet of someone deciding how much of the answer was safe to carry. "My people are not the only ones who travel," she said finally. "There are others. Some of them believe that certain bloodlines should not continue, that certain combinations of genetics represent a threat to an order they have maintained for a very long time. A threat to their order. Her father was not from my species," Zona said. "That is enough for them." Ethan looked at the egg. The light under the surface shifted slowly, one long pulse, then stillness. "How long have you been on Earth?" 14 of your years." 14 years. He did a strange math in his head. "And nobody ever found out." "People," Zona said carefully, "find what they expect to find. I wore the right clothes. I used the right words. I paid my bills on time, and I did not cause problems. And after a while, people stopped looking at me carefully." He thought about his mother, who had told 3 different people at her book club that Zona was probably from Eastern Europe, possibly Latvian. He thought about Mr. Zerdiaz across the street, who waved at her every morning without ever appearing to wonder why her hand moved in a slightly different arc when she waved back. "And me?" Ethan said. "You looked carefully," Zona said. "You always looked carefully. I noticed 11 months ago." He felt something shift in the room, not physically, but in the way the air between them sat. He had stood at his window and watched her, and he had thought he was being subtle about it. "I wasn't hiding," he said. "No," she agreed. "You were not." Outside, something scraped against the side of the house. Once, then silence again. They both went still. Zona's head turned toward the east wall with a precision that was not human, a motion that traveled in a perfect straight line with no overshoot, no correction, just arrival. Ethan held his breath. 30 seconds. 40. Nothing. "Wind," Zona said. But she said it the way you say wind when you are not completely certain it was wind, and you are running the alternative possibilities in the background. "What do they look like?" Ethan asked. "The ones who are looking for her." "Like nothing," she said. "They are very good at that too." He thought about the car engine on the highway that had stopped too abruptly. He thought about the quality of the silence that had followed it. He thought about the fact that Zona, who had spent 14 years being invisible, had calculated that the safest place she could find at 2:47 in the morning was the bedroom of the 23-year-old next door. "You couldn't go anywhere else," he said. "You ran out of options before you got to me?" She looked at him. "I ran through all the options," she said. "I got to you." It was not a reassurance. It was not a compliment. It was just the data, delivered flat. And somehow that made it harder to argue with than any softer version would have been. The egg pulsed. Ethan looked at it, then at Zona, then at the locked window. "What do we need?" he said. Zona reached into the pocket of her dark pants and pulled out a small object, roughly the size and shape of a coin, but with a surface that was not quite metal, not quite glass. It caught the faint light in the room and did something complicated with it. "This monitors atmospheric density around the egg," she said. If anything attempts to create a localized field, it will get warm. Ethan stared at it. And if it gets warm, then we will have approximately 90 seconds. 90 seconds to do what? Move. He looked at the coin not coin in her palm. He looked at his window. He looked at the egg on his floor, breathing its slow, patient breath, carrying a life that two other versions of itself had not gotten to keep. My truck, he said. Keys are on the hook by the kitchen door. If we need to move, we move in the truck. Zona looked at him. The roads may not be safe. I know every back road between here and the Utah border, he said. I grew up here. Something moved through her expression. Not quite surprise. More like a recalculation, a rapid resorting of variables. Yes, she said. That is useful. Ethan nodded once. He did not lie back down. He pulled the desk chair to the corner nearest the egg, and sat in it, and faced the door and the window simultaneously, the way you position yourself when you need to see everything at once. Zona watched him do this. Then she settled back against the wall beside her daughter, her long legs folded beneath her, that coin not coin resting in her open palm. And she watched the door with him. The night stretched out around them, flat and dark and holding its breath. At 3:22, the coin got warm. Ethan was on his feet before Zona finished saying his name. He grabbed the egg with both hands, felt the warmth of it travel up through his palms and into his arms. A living heat that was nothing like holding something inanimate. And Zona was already up, already at the door, already checking the hallway in that no-overshoot precise way of hers. Backstairs, she said. He followed her. The house was dark. His parents' room was at the end of the hall. His father slept heavily because of the medication. His mother was a light sleeper, but the back stairs were carpeted and Zona moved like smoke, producing no sound at all. Ethan had spent his teenage years sneaking out of this house, and he matched her. Step for step, weight distributed, breathing controlled. Kitchen, keys on the hook, truck in the driveway. They were outside in 40 seconds. Ethan did not start the engine immediately. Zona was scanning the street. The coin in her hand was now visibly warm. He could see the faint distortion of heat above it in the cold air. But she held it steady and she looked at the street, and then she looked at the sky. And then she said quietly, "The field is diffuse. They are not certain of the location yet. They are sweeping." Sweeping how wide? 3 blocks. Then we go 4. He got in the truck. Then Zona folded herself into the passenger seat with the economical grace of someone who had spent 14 years learning to fit into spaces designed for smaller bodies. The egg sat in her lap, pulsing. Ethan pulled out of the driveway with the lights off. The street was empty. He knew every crack in this asphalt, every stop sign that was timed wrong, every backway that bypassed the main road. He turned left at the end of the block, and then right again, moving away from the direction of the highway, away from the place where the engine had cut off too abruptly 3 hours ago. The egg pulsed. Once, twice, steady, patient, alive. In the rearview mirror, the street behind them was empty. For now. The dirt road past the old salvage yard had not been on any map that Ethan could find when he first moved back to town. It was the kind of road that exists only because someone, decades ago, needed to get somewhere without being seen and then never told anyone about it afterward. Ethan had found it at 17, following a coyote on a stupid dare with his friend Cal, and he had filed it away in the part of his memory reserved for things that might someday matter. It mattered now. He killed the remaining low light he'd been using and drove on memory, on the texture of the ground under the tires, on the way the scrub on either side of the track sat a certain height against the sky. Zona did not ask how he knew where he was going. She watched the road ahead with her head tilted at a slight angle and one hand resting lightly on the dashboard, feeling for vibrations in the same way a person might press their palm to a wall to find a stud. The egg in her lap had stopped its agitation pulse. It was back to the slow, steady breathing rhythm. Ethan stopped the truck behind the remains of what had once been a grain storage structure, long since collapsed to two walls and a roof fragment. It was solid cover. It broke their outline from the road, from the sky, and from the direction of town. He cut the engine. Silence. Desert silence. The kind that has texture and weight. "How long before they triangulate?" he said. "They were sweeping when we left," Zona said. "If they did not catch our vector off the road, then we have perhaps 2 hours before they calculate the most probable directions and begin physical search." "And if they caught our vector?" 20 minutes. He looked at the clock on the dash. 3:41. "What happens when the egg hatches?" Zona turned her head and looked at him fully, those amber eyes steady in the dark cab. "She becomes harder to hide," she said. "A newborn of my species produces a specific kind of energy signature for the first 72 hours. There is no way to suppress it. Every scanner within 40 miles will read it." 40 miles. Yes. Ethan processed this. 40 miles covered a lot of Nevada. It covered the highway junction. It covered every town within range. It covered whatever was sitting on that highway 2 hours ago with its engine running. "So we have 4 days to find somewhere that scanner coverage doesn't reach," he said. "Or somewhere that the signal would be lost in a larger noise," Zona said. "Certain industrial areas produce interference. Certain geological formations disrupt the specific frequency. Certain altitude ranges attenuate the range. Certain altitude ranges." Ethan looked out the windshield at the flat desert and the black sky above it and past that. At the dark line of mountains that began about 30 miles east, rising sharply out of the basin floor. "How certain are we talking?" Zona tilted her head. 72% reduction in signal range at elevations above 9,000 feet. 9,000 feet. He knew the mountains. He had hiked them at 16 with a scout troop, badly prepared and loving every miserable mile of it. He knew which access roads were gated and which were only theoretically gated. He knew where the Forest Service hadn't checked a trail register in 3 seasons. "So I know a place." "You keep saying that." "I keep meaning it." She looked at him for a moment in the dark. Then she looked down at the egg. Her long fingers moved over its surface, not quite touching, hovering a centimeter above the shell. And the light under the surface shifted in response, moving toward her hand like a slow, warm current. It was the most plainly loving thing Ethan had ever seen. He looked away from it because it felt private. "She will be scared when she hatches," Zona said. "The first hours are disorienting. She will not know what she is or where she is. She will be very loud." "How loud?" "Loud enough." He nodded. "She will reach for the first person she sees," Zona said. "It is an instinct. She will reach and she will not understand why the person is a different shape and temperature, and she will be frightened and she will make a sound." Ethan heard what Zona was not quite saying yet. "You might not be the first person she sees," he said. "No," Zona said. "I might not." He thought about that. He thought about it for a while, there in the dark behind 2 walls of a dead building with the desert outside and the mountains to the east, and something out there somewhere running scanners through the night. "If she reaches for me," he said, "I'll reach back." Zona was very still. "You do not know what that means yet," she said. "No," he agreed. "But you calculated me. So tell me." Another long silence. The egg pulsed. Zona began to explain what it meant for a newborn of her species to reach for a person and for that person to reach back. And Ethan listened, and the desert held the truck and everyone in it inside its huge, dark quiet. And overhead the stars were the sharp, violent kind that only exist at altitude and distance. The kind that look like they are trying to say something urgent through all that space and silence. By the time she finished explaining, Ethan had 3 questions and no fear. That surprised him too. He started the truck. Not the back road, not yet. He needed to go home first. Get real gear, the kind of gear that meant 4 days on a mountain was survivable and not merely possible. He had 15 minutes at most, in and out, moving quiet. "My house first," he said. "They may be watching. Then I'll be fast." Zona looked at him. Then she looked forward. "Fast," she agreed. The truck moved out from behind the dead walls and onto the pale dirt road, heading back toward town, toward the house where his parents slept, and his gear hung in the closet, and the keys to the gated access road were on a ring with a red tag that his scout leader had given him 20 years ago and told him to keep because you never know. You never know. Ethan drove. The egg breathed. The mountains waited to the east. The gear took 11 minutes, and Ethan moved through the dark house like he had been born to it, which in a way he had. Room to room without turning on a light, hands going to the right hooks and shelves from muscle memory alone. Sleeping bag rated to 15 degrees. A second one, which he pulled from the hall closet without thinking about why. 2 changes of clothes. The emergency pack that had lived under his bed since his father's health scare and had never been opened. Water filter. 3 days of food in sealed packages. The first aid kit in the red case. The propane camp stove. The knife his grandfather had given him, which had never been used for anything more dramatic than opening packaging. He stood in the kitchen and looked at the gear pile and added 3 more things. A wool blanket from the cedar chest, the battery radio his mother kept in the junk drawer, and a pair of his mother's wool socks because he had seen Zona's bare feet and the mountain did not care about species. Or he left a note on the kitchen counter. It said, "Had to go help a friend. Don't worry. Will call when I can. Love, E." It was the most inadequate note he had ever written. It was also the truest. Zona was out of the truck and had the gear loaded in the bed before he reached the vehicle. She moved it with an efficiency that made him wonder how strong she actually was under the stillness she wore like a second skin. She did not arrange it randomly. She arranged it with the logic of someone who had loaded for a fast departure before and knew which items needed to be reachable and which could be buried. They were out of the driveway in 3 minutes. No lights on the street, no cars, no sound except the truck and the wind and the low frequencies of the desert night. Ethan hit the highway going east and then turned off it almost immediately onto a county road that nobody outside the county would know was there. And from there onto the access road that was gated, but whose gate had a combination that had not been changed in 20 years because the Forest Service had bigger problems. He entered the combination without stopping. The gate swung. They went through. The road climbed immediately and aggressively, switchbacking up the mountain face with the casual disregard for comfort that old mining roads are built with. The truck handled it, which he had always trusted, and Zona handled it, which he watched her do with a kind of absorbed interest, her body adjusting to the motion with that continuous, plant-like fluidity, the egg cradled in her lap with both hands, its pulse unchanged. Stable. Patient. 2 days and change from hatching. At 6,000 feet, the temperature dropped hard. Ethan turned the heater up. Zona did not ask for it. She noticed it the way you notice someone handing you something you needed before you said so. "My people feel cold differently," she said. "Not worse, differently." "Differently how?" "It enters from the surface inward," she said. "It takes longer to reach the center, so I'm always aware of where the cold has reached and where it has not." "That sounds exhausting." "It is useful," she said. "In practice." They broke through the first tree line, and the pines closed around the road, and the sky disappeared except for a corridor directly above. The stars through that corridor were even more aggressive than they had been on the flat, impossibly dense, the kind of sky that makes the scale of things impossible to pretend about. At 8,000 feet, Ethan pulled the truck off the road and behind a screen of pines and cut the engine. "We walk from here," he said. "Road goes up another quarter-mile, but it's exposed on the ridge. There's a ranger station on the other side that might be staffed." "How far on foot?" 20 minutes. There's a rock formation. It's called the Cathedral locally. Nobody mapped it right. It sits in a bowl below the ridge, and you can't see it from the road or from above. Zona looked through the windshield at the pines. "You know this mountain." "I grew up at the bottom of it." She was quiet. Then she said, "The coin has been cool for 40 minutes. He felt something release in his chest that he hadn't realized he'd been holding clamped shut. "Good," he said. They got out. Chalker Ethan took the heavy pack. Zona took the egg and the secondary items. He did not offer to carry the egg, and she did not offer to give it. Some arrangements are obvious without discussion. The trail to the cathedral was not a trail. It was a suggestion made by years of deer crossings and a few humans who had been paying attention. Ethan followed it by the feel of the ground under his boots and the memory of being 16 and tired and happy, and having no idea that the moment would last in him this long. At the cathedral, he stopped. It was what it always had been. A ring of standing stones, some natural, some suspiciously not. Cupping a flat floor of granite with pine on 3 sides and a low overhang of rock on the 4th that would keep rain and wind and most eyes away from whatever was inside the cup. Zona walked into the center of it. She turned slowly, all the way around. The egg in her arms pulsed steadily. She stopped turning. "Yes," she said. Whatever calculation she ran, it came back clean. Ethan set down the pack and began making something that was not quite a camp, but was exactly what 4 days in a mountain bowl required. No fire yet. The smoke was readable from too far, but he laid out the sleeping bags and the blanket and the stove and the food. Organized the water filter for the snow-melt stream he could hear 20 feet downslope. When he looked up, Zona was sitting at the center of the granite floor, the egg between her crossed legs, and she was doing something with her hands above it, a slow motion like conducting, and the light under the egg's surface was moving in response, shifting and blooming and settling. He watched her for a moment. "What are you doing?" he said quietly. "Talking to her," Zona said. "Yeah, she can hear from inside. She's been able to hear for 2 weeks." "What are you telling her?" Zona's hands moved. The light shifted. "That we found a good place," she said. "That she does not need to be afraid. That someone helped us who did not have to." Ethan looked at the egg for a moment. Then he sat down on the granite, cross-legged, facing Zona across the egg's warm glow. "What's her name?" he said. Zona looked up, those amber eyes across the light. "She has not named herself yet," Zona said. "My people name themselves. At the moment of hatching, the first sound they make is the first syllable of the name they will carry. So you don't know yet? No. He nodded. Above them, the stars through the pine canopy were extraordinary. Enormous, doing that thing they do at altitude where they stop being distant and start feeling immediate. Like something that could be touched if you cared to try. 4 days, Ethan said. 4 days, Zona agreed. They settled in. The mountain was cold and quiet, and indifferent in the way that old things are indifferent, not unkind, just much older than anything happening at its feet. And at its feet, in the bowl below the ridge that nobody had mapped right, a 23-year-old human and an alien who had been somebody's neighbor for 11 months watched over a small, blue-black egg that breathed like a sleeping child and waited to begin. The 4th morning arrived the way high-altitude mornings do, with no warning and no mercy. The light hard and sudden through the pines, the temperature dropping one final deliberate degree before the sun pulled it back. Ethan was already awake. He had been awake for an hour, sitting with his back against the low rock overhang, watching the egg. Something was different. For 3 days it had maintained its rhythm, that slow, patient pulse, 1 beat every 4 or 5 seconds, and the light moving in gentle rolls under the shell. But in the last hour, the rhythm had changed. It was faster, shorter, less patient, and the light was no longer rolling. It was flickering. Zona was awake too. She had not slept much across the 4 days, 2 or 3 hours at a time, in a sitting position, one hand always resting near but not touching the shell. She was awake now, and she was watching the egg, and her face had an expression that Ethan had not seen before. Not afraid, not calm, but something beyond both of those. Something that had no translation in any language he knew. Now? He said. Soon, she said. He stood up. His knees were stiff from 4 days of granite and cold. He stretched them without making a production of it, and then he crouched back down closer to the egg and watched it with her. The flickering intensified. A hairline appeared. It ran from the top of the egg to about 1/3 of the way down, barely visible, a stress mark. Then another, a branching from the first. Then silence, complete stillness. Then everything at once. The shell did not crack outward the way an eggshell cracks. It dissolved inward. It folded toward its own center like paper softening in water, each piece compressing and darkening and disappearing in a sequence that took maybe 3 seconds and left nothing behind except a faint smell of ozone and a small figure sitting in the place the egg had occupied, blinking in the new light. She was very small. Smaller than Ethan had expected, though he did not know what he had expected. She was Zona's color, gray-green, but brighter, not faded yet by time. She had Zona's long proportions in miniature. Her eyes, when they opened, were the same amber, but without the depth yet. Fresher, newer, learning what light was. She made a sound. It was not a word. It was a single syllable, short and clear and strange, and it hung in the cold mountain air. And beside him Zona made a soft sound that was not quite a breath, receiving it. The first syllable of her name. Then the small figure turned her head. She looked at Ethan. He did not move. He sat very still, the way you sit when something wild is deciding whether you are safe. And he kept his hands open and visible, and his eyes steady and soft. His heart was doing something large and complicated in his chest. That jaw ache hammering again, but this time the feeling attached to it was not anything like the feeling from the first night with the locked window and the clicking latch. This was entirely different. The small figure reached out one long, thin hand. Ethan reached back, her fingers wrapped around two of his. They were warm. Warmer than anything had a right to be in the cold morning. A warmth that traveled up through his palm and into his arm and settled somewhere in the center of his chest, like a lamp being lit. She looked at him. He looked at her. Zona was utterly still beside them. Then the small figure made another sound, different from the first, softer, more exploratory. A question maybe, or maybe not a question. Maybe something that didn't map to questions or answers in any language that existed in this granite bowl, in this mountain, in this state, on this planet. But Ethan understood it anyway. The way you understand certain things not through the words, but through whatever is underneath the words when you strip the translation away. She was saying, "You are here." And his whole body, his hands, his warmth, the steadiness he had maintained for 4 days on a mountain, said back to her, "Yes." Zona exhaled. That long, double-layered exhale. The chord instead of the note. And this time, there was something in it that had not been there before. Something that had been held back for 3 eggs and 14 years and 40 miles of scanner range and 90 seconds of warning and back roads through the dark. She did not cry. Her species did not, she would explain later, produce tears. But her face did something that served the same purpose. A release, a restructuring, a slow reordering of every muscle around the place where the tension had lived for so long that the muscles had forgotten what they were like without it. Ethan looked at her over the top of her daughter's head. Zona looked back. "Thank you," she said. The words were completely inadequate. She knew it. He knew it. They let them stand anyway because there was nothing better, and the inadequacy was honest. The small figure was still holding 2 of his fingers. She had turned back to look at the pine trees now, tracking the light the way plants track light, with that continuous, smooth attention. She would have 1,000 questions soon. She would have them in a language she had not fully formed yet, about a world she had arrived in through a dissolving shell on a mountain at dawn. She would be loud, Zona had said. She would be frightened. Right now she was neither. Right now she was watching the light move through the pines with 2 of Ethan's fingers wrapped in her hand. And the mountain was doing its ancient, indifferent thing above them. And the scanner range was attenuated. And the coin in Zona's pocket had been cool for 4 days. And somewhere in the far distance, a hawk was making its morning sound. And the world was exactly as large and strange and specific as it had always been. Ethan had moved back to this town because his father got sick and he had planned to leave as soon as things stabilized. He did not know. Sitting on the granite in the cold morning light, with a newborn alien's fingers wrapped around his. Each one what stabilized would mean now, or when it would come, or what leaving would look like from the other side of it. He did not know if the ones who had been scanning and searching and sweeping would come back. He did not know what 4 days had bought them or what it would cost. He did not know what Zona's people would say when they found out where she had been. He did not know what a 60% reduction in scanner range actually added up to over the years ahead, or what it meant for a child of 2 species to grow up between languages and shapes and temperatures on a planet that had not been consulted about any of it. He did not know any of that yet. What he knew was this. The egg was gone. The child was here. The mountain was solid beneath them. And whatever came next, whatever swept toward them from the road or the sky, or the 14 years of consequences piling up behind Zona's quiet gray-green life, it would find them here, together, in a place that nobody had mapped right. And it would have to go through him to get to her. Both of them. Either of them. He had not known that about himself 4 days ago. The mountain had told him. The small figure squeezed his fingers once with surprising strength and went back to watching the light. Ethan stayed exactly where he was.